Today's world is full of serendipity, which is our ability to leverage the occasion if we are prepared. So I was actually literally lying in the bed, lazily passing in the morning, and then Facebook tells me Brett King is live. And so I check it out, and turns out we were in the same city.
Milano.
And you were giving a talk.
I was talking at Accenture Interactive, and I did a live stream of my presentation, and you were asking questions and during the live stream, and ended up, you said, hey, let's catch up and get something on video, and here we are at the airport, at Malpensa Milan Airport, doing video. It's the first time I've done a video interview at the airport, so hats off to you.
And Malpensa is not one of my favorite airports, even though my check-in software, Swarm from Foursquare, tells me I'm here the 94th time, or at least I'm checking in the 94th time. Anyway, here we are. It's wonderful. And you just published your 5th book.
Correct. It's called Bank 4.0, Banking Everywhere, Never at a Bank.
You have made this into a series. It's not the 4th, because Bank 1.0, who cares? So you started with Bank 2.0, 3.0, and each were about some revolution in banking. So 2.0 was about the internet, 3.0 was about mobile and the apps. What is the theme of 4.0?
So I wrote Bank 2.0 in 2010. Actually, I wrote it in 2009. I finished on Christmas Day 2009 and published it in 2010. And then it was just 3 years later that I launched Bank 3.0. So it's been 6 years, effectively, almost, since that time. And the reason for that gap is, well, one, I wanted to see how things develop. But to be honest, I didn't know what Bank 4.0 was going to be. And it wasn't really until I saw what was happening with the Chinese ecosystem, Ant Financial, Alipay, Tencent WeChat, the 4,000 P2P lenders there, what was happening in Pesa in Kenya and so forth, that I realized we were seeing not just a fundamental shift for digitization of banking, but a rethink of the way banking fits into our world. So we were starting to strip back the core utility of the bank, the ability to safely store money or value stores, the ability to move money safely, and the ability to access credit when and when we need it, and resurfacing that, through purpose-built technology experiences. And that was a shift because it wasn't taking the old products that we used to deliver through a physical branch, like a plastic credit card, and giving you access to that on the mobile phone. In the mobile payments ecosystem in China, which will do 22 trillion in mobile payments this year, it's just core ability to send money across that network from one person to the other. You don't need a plastic card. You don't need a signature on an application form in a branch. You don't need a point of sale terminal, right? It was just that ability to mobilize mobile payments. And so I was looking then, saying, with things like artificial intelligence, personal AI, next-gen Alexa, Siri, mixed reality smart glasses, as we start to see banking become increasingly real-time and contextual, embedded in our world, solving problems in real time, what sort of competency would you need to be a good bank in that space? And, what are we seeing in terms of development today that sets the expectations for the next 15 to 20 years? And what I ultimately found out was that the fastest growing institutions that can scale in this environment are technology companies, not banks at all. And so that really raised the question I wanted to answer in Bank 4.0.
You are describing this as a rethinking based on first principles, making a few analogies of previous industries that have been redesigned and refounded, really, when innovation arrived at a scale that the incumbents couldn't really match.
So, there's numerous examples. If you look at the most disruptive technologies throughout history, many of them share this first principles design approach. So, the Gutenberg printing press, right? The steam machine, the telegraph, moving from horse and cart to the automobile. Now, when you have a first principles rethink of transportation like the automobile, the flow-on effects of that are significant. You now have to design roads to cater for vehicles. You design cities for built for vehicles. You have to have distribution of fuel and gasoline systems. You have to have road laws, licensing for drivers, etc., etc. So the flow-on effects of a first principles rethink of transportation, in that example, was significant. Then you look at something like SpaceX with first principles thinking, and that was one of the things that started me down this approach. Hearing Elon Musk talk about that, or say Steve Jobs and on Johnny Ive with the iPhone. It wasn't an iteration on the Nokia banana phone or the Motorola Flip. It was a rethink of how this personal computing device that also could be a phone would fit into your world. So that, for me, was where the penny dropped in terms of these ecosystems being created in China, were evidence of this first principles rethink of the way money should move around the system and the place of banking in our life.
And of course, when you are part of an incumbent, the type of questions that you ask reflect the cages of your old kind of thinking. So the horse and cart industry was preoccupied by the exponential increase of horse manure in the cities, whether London or New York. And yes, it was a problem, but it wasn't a problem for the car industry. And today's banks are obsessed with their paper forms and signatures and KYC and AML, but all of those are not an issue or not a central issue for the new types of financial institutions.
It's ironic, but when I'm on the road and I'm speaking in front of these banks, one of the regular questions I get is, tell me who the best bank is. Because I think there's this concept of we want to benchmark ourselves against the best and sort of copy that. But, when I say to them, well, it's not a bank, it's a technology company, they're like, well, no, but I hear you, but tell me who the best bank is anyway at this. And it's sort of like, if you're...
I want horses that leave less manure. Don't tell me about the cars.
Exactly. And so that is the legacy thinking problem. And banking, because not only we've reinforced those legacy processes, compliance and legal and so forth, but our product structures and our distribution strategy, we've really hard-coded that into banking mainframes and core systems and so forth, as well as organization charts. And so it's very sticky in terms of trying to move that. So the example I gave before, like credit access, imagine you walk into a grocery store. I illustrated this in the talk today. You have your cart, you fill it up, you go to the checkout, and your card's declined because your salary hasn't hit the account yet. So a bank will say, well, you need a credit card, obviously. This is how we solve that problem. Whereas a first principle thinker will say, no. I know how much you spend on groceries. You spend €500 on groceries. If you go into the store and you only have €300, I know that likely I'm going to have to solve that problem. So I can give you a message saying, it looks like you need credit to solve that. But the implications of that, think about the org chart implications. I now don't need a credit card department. Right? Now, try and sell that to a bank. Try and sell that to the credit card head of cards, that we don't need plastic anymore. We just need your core credit capability, and we need to resurface that through these technology experiences. That's a really, really tough discussion to have. And so that's why you now have organizations like the Ant Financials and the challenger banks around the world and these others who are just scaling very quickly and creating this massive activity, and the banks are all scratching their head going, yeah, but they don't have a bank charter. So, how can you treat them like a bank?
When the internet was born, it started as a research exercise, as an academic exercise, to the point that for a couple of decades or even more, it was prohibited that people would use it for commercial applications. including Tim Berners-Lee designing HTML and HTTP that did not include any forethought of payment mechanisms or transfer of value or identity. But then, when at the beginning of the 90s, commercial applications were permitted, the pent-up demand for these was so strong that we demeaned ourselves to adopt a 70-year-old technology, the credit card technology, and bolted it on top of something, and we are still suffering from those consequences. So, as we talk about a native mobile global internet or even IoT networks that need to understand, address, and transfer value, how are we going to do that? Are we going to give credit cards to our robots?
This is a great question. You know, when we designed these ecosystems, they were just for sending the payment transaction record. Right? And typically you're sending it from point to point, trusted partners in this ecosystem, but it was a closed loop ecosystem. So the banks and the card schemes and the merchants who are on this, had a very stringent control mechanism across these networks, but they don't scale particularly well. The merchant onboarding process has always been very lengthy. You've got long contracts you have to sign and so forth. What we had in China emerge with the mobile payments, and the reason China urban centers have gone cashless so quickly is it wasn't just about the fact that China had not a lot of legacy. They didn't use a lot of plastic cards. They didn't use checks. They just used cash. So there was that. There was less friction to circumvent. But the second thing was there was the network effect, this new network, internet and so forth, and mobile that could be leveraged. But you step that up. You start having IoT, you start having drones that are delivering your pizza that are then doing a transaction or a triggering transaction. You have an autonomous vehicle driving on the streets, paying a road tax. It's got to have some form of wallet. And so now what we are starting to think about is that rather than it just being a payment transaction, we actually need to have very dynamic types of wallets and commerce systems, zero-proof models. We need to send identity data with the payment transaction information. We'll be able to create wallets on the fly in ecosystems where, for example, you're paying with your Alipay wallet into another ecosystem that's not compatible, that we'll figure out ways around that. Whatever way you look at that, that traditional sort of command and control payments ecosystem or closed-loop payment ecosystems we've had have at a central issue the problem of identifying you and being able to successfully do that transaction in an automated fashion without you verifying your identity through that traditional mechanism. So when we start looking at redesigning payments for IoT and those sort of things, you come up with something that looks more like blockchain, combined with new ways of thinking about identity, zero-proof models and behavioral data for identity and biometrics data for identity rather than what's your date of birth, your social security number, your address, were the data points we typically use for that. And it's a lot more dynamic, it'll be a lot more robust, but it's a complete departure from the systems that we have today. So you can't take the SWIFT network and retrofit this stuff on, because it's just not built like that. You're really better off starting from scratch.
When I talk about these themes at conferences, the example I always use to confirm that, yes, indeed, we do have checkbooks and credit cards and banknotes that work is asteroid mining. I have friends working on that, and they have been for years, and whether it takes 10 years or 30 years, it doesn't matter. We will have swarms of intelligent robots who will need some mechanism to store, account for, and transfer value,
yes,
whether it is for transportation, communication, or the very commodities, the raw resources that they will be extracting in space. So I asked them, are they going to use credit cards, checkbooks, or banknotes? or indeed there will be something like what we call the blockchain today, that is going to be the native consensus mechanism for that. And I was delighted when last week Consensus actually announced that they are acquiring planetary resources. I felt like once in a while, what I'm predicting about the future is actually happening.
Well, I think the really interesting part of this is agency-based commerce. So this is really the first step when we give agents, AI-based agents, the ability to transact on our behalf. So the way we'll move from e-commerce to agency is through voice. So we'll say, Alexa, order me a pizza, right? Alexa, book me a flight to Rome on Friday. Bill the company account for it. Siri, can I afford to go out for dinner tonight? These are the sorts of, we will give agents, these AI agents to act on our behalf. So then you can imagine a time, latter half of next decade, where more transactions are occurring agent to agent or AI to AI than human to human or human to merchant through those traditional networks. When that happens, something else interesting happens, is that if you're entering that space as a competitor or a participant in that ecosystem, data becomes one of the most critical commodities. Behavioral data, location data, these are the things that enable you to have value in this ecosystem and drive, the sort of AI type of capabilities. And so when we look at blockchain, it's not just blockchain, but we started to create new value ecosystems on top of that, anticipating different ways we would manage value exchange. So ICO tokens emerged on top of this, and we call them utility tokens and so forth. But it's very much similar to what happened with the stock market, where years ago when you had this sort of unstructured play and people, creating value in companies, but you had to sort of try and, quantify the value that a certain company would bring. Now we're trying to quantify data, we're trying to quantify utility that a company has. And it's almost as if the whole world is shifting away from physical conversion of raw materials to products, or physical quantification of commodities, like oil, gas, potatoes, etc. And we're now trying to say the world of the future, based on AI commerce and things like this, is going to be a world of digital value exchange as well as some physical exchange. So what does a capital market look like that's based on digital value exchange? Does it look like the token markets we have today? What make the best digital commodities? If you're going to take the energy system we have today, where historically about half of the commodities market globally has been energy-based, fossil fuels, and now you have solar and renewables thrown in the mix. And so do you decimate the commodities market? Or if you're a trader, do you look to replace that lost value that's going through the global trading system with new digital commodities?
One of my favorite investments is the Sun Exchange, which is a platform that allows you to own a solar cell in a solar plant, and the yield of the contract that sells the energy generated locally is transferred to you in a Bitcoin transaction, regardless of where you are on the planet. And then you can offset your local energy consumption with the best sunshine that you can get from Africa. And that is amazing. The opening scene of one of the foundational texts of those people who think about accelerating technological change, Accelerando from Charles Strauss, is the guy sitting with his smart glasses in the Netherlands and incorporating on the fly the IP vehicle for one of his patents, because his bots are telling him that now it is becoming valuable. And hey, isn't that the world that we are now seeing coming into place around us?
I'm a frustrated sci-fi author in that respect. As a futurist that's written, as a futurist in this space, I would love to be able to do what Charles Stross or Ramez Nam, one of your colleagues, or David Brin, these guys that obviously we're friends with now, that they can think out of these systems, 100, 200, 10,000 years in the future and sort of imagine that. But, a lot of what we do in that cycle, we actually take ideas from science fiction and try and figure out shorter term applications of that. And a lot of the tech we use, it's always been said, the Motorola flip phone and its resemblance to the communicator out of Star Trek and so forth. When we talk about 3D printers and the Star Trek replicators, nanobot, all this stuff was foretold in sci-fi. So I do like to take inspiration from that. But the other element is when you're trying to look at change that's occurring, you do have to be a student of history, because when it comes to human behavior and how we respond to change, that's where the historical precedents are really, really interesting. And so you can start to predict trends where technology is going to take us, exponential trends and so forth, but then, well, which of those are going to get through the human filter? And that's what I find very, very interesting. And we've got great historical precedents for that.
And of course, you build companies, I build and invest in companies, and for us, where technology meets the markets is crucial, because we want to see successful, positive change enacted in the world through products and services that are able to deliver the promise of maybe not utopia, but certainly to discredit and to falsify the dystopian views that so many are bound to repeat.
I think you and I have that in common. We're techno-optimists. Right? And I guess many of the Singularity guys are as well, where we think that technology, Peter Diamandis certainly is, with Abundance and Bold. We look to the future as these are all the problems we could solve if we just got together on the same page and we utilize the technology. What could we do with energy that costs one hundredth of what it costs to generate it from a brick of coal? What could we do with computing power, having a supercomputer in our pocket? Incidentally, most of us carry around these supercomputers in our pocket today that if you went back to 1990 and took your iPhone or your Samsung Galaxy and you presented it in 1990 to computer engineers, they'd say this is worth $50 million in 1990 computing terms. So I think ultimately, coming back to your point, despite the fact we're investing and we're looking for the exit strategy and all of that all the time, we are picking those things that are going to make people's lives better. And so if you resist this technology advancements, and we see pushback against things like this with Brexit and Trump and this right-wing movement, wanting to get back to the way it was in the 1960s. But you know what? We had higher rates of infant mortality then. We had higher rates of financial exclusion then. We had all these medical problems that today we can solve. So the past, it is full of nostalgia, but the future is where I think we really can use technology to benefit everyone on the planet.
I also believe that. Congratulations for the coming out of your latest book, Banks 4.0. Brad King, thank you very much.
David Orban, thank you for having me. It's great to catch up, even if it is in Malpensa Airport.